We have mostly people from the East Coast. We have some people from the West Coast. So good morning for you on the West and good afternoon on the East. We are presenting this webinar as part of the EALA, which is the Educating All Learners Alliance. It's brand new. It was launched in response to the COVID-19 crisis and then transitioned to online learning for students with learning variability. These are just a few basic slides that give you some background about the EALA. Here are the founding partners: NCLD, Brooklyn Lab Charter School, ISTE, Innovate EDU, the National Center for Special Education and Charter Schools, and Ed Together. And here are many of the partners, and I know they are expanding every single day, which is very exciting. Here are some details about how to participate. So you have Gabrielle's email address. She invited you to the session when you confirmed and registered with Zoom. You can always email her. And then if you go to the educatingalllearners.org site, there are many, many resources there. You can search the resource library, you can join, you can contribute to a forum. There are responses that you could submit and you could sign up for updates. We today are going to talk about how we build tech-empowered learners, and our approach is from the bottom up. All right, so I'm going to start with a little bit of theory and then we're going to go right into practice. So I want to make sure that we psychologically prime ourselves to think about the learners with whom we work. We in our program start with neuropsych testing. You may not always have access to neuropsych testing. You always have access to behavior in your classrooms and behavior of your students. So I'm going to go through sort of the way that we analyze thinking. So cognition is thinking. We always think about the cognitive sub-processes, which are the component processes that support thinking. We think about our behavior at the thinking level, which is called cognition. And then we think about our thoughts, which is metacognition. When we break this down into what do our students do, a sub-process would be something like working memory. So holding information in mind and working with it at the same time in the short term. We also think about speed of processing. How quickly can our students do things? And there are 4 basic parts to speed of processing. So orienting to a stimulus, assessing the stimulus, formulating a response, and then carrying out that response. These sorts of cognitive sub-processes contribute to our cognition or our thinking. So we always look at things like reading, writing, and memory in our students, and they're influenced by multiple and integrated types of cognitive sub-processes. So when you're thinking about the behaviors you see with a child, you might be saying, well, I see differences or variability in reading, and that may be from a specific diagnosis. When you dig further, it's probably because of challenges with working memory, speed of processing, orthographic processing, all sorts of cognitive sub-processes. What we try to do is really get our students into the metacognitive area. We want them to be thinking about our thoughts, and this shift is developmental. So from, but as a practitioner, I have to tell you, I believe that we do not do a good enough job with metacognition in the early levels. And when I talk with people, I say, I think we should be teaching metacognition from infancy, right? Because from the very beginnings of myelination in the brain, we're seeing our species being able to control their behavior. And if we can articulate that across development so that infants, children, young adults, emerging adults understand what they're doing and then can be strategic about it, we're going to have the sorts of learners who can respond well and adapt well in any sort of situation. So we're looking for that ability to be metacognitive as a way of supporting development across the lifespan. The questions we ask our students aren't just about strategy. So often we're teaching strategy in reading, like, for example, we're teaching a grapheme phoneme correspondence. What sound does this letter make? And then how do we blend those sounds together? And if the word doesn't play fair and the orthographic pattern is unusual, we have to memorize it. And we have to develop that area of the brain that allows us to see that pattern and know it automatically. And we give students all sorts of strategies to do this. But we want them to go beyond just using strategies. We want them to be able to understand from a self-regulatory level what strategies to use, when, and why. So that's when we get to these sorts of questions. What are my strengths as a learner? What are my challenges as a learner? And how can I adjust my approach for whatever task or setting or time in which I'm working? So I am going to right now ask our student participants to introduce themselves, and then we are going to go into a little demo of how we work with metacognition. So I'm Laura Vanderberg. I direct the program for advancement of learning at Curry College. I'm a professor and a director. And we have two of our students here. We have Jack Sapino, who is a rising senior. He is a communications major. He's on the East Coast. And we also have Aviva Hollander, who is a rising sophomore. She's finishing her first year at Curry College, and she's on the West Coast. So Jack, could you introduce yourself briefly and tell us what are some of your strengths and what are some of your challenges?
So as Laura said, believe it or not, I'm a rising senior. I can't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
I would say my strengths are definitely talking things out. I've learned that through communication, through even throughout high school, talking things out helped me be able to figure things out. My other strength is self-advocacy. I think that that's the biggest thing going into college. So being able to have self-advocacy moving through my college career has really helped me able to understand kind of what I did wrong, or maybe need help on something. So that was very helpful. I think the biggest weakness I have, and I think that is I'm starting to really understand it more, is the fact that I'm not the best at memorizing and test taking. However, I feel as though with this idea of metacognition, thinking about this idea of metacognition as we talk about it a little bit more, I begin to find a way to remember things because I'm thinking about my thoughts. So I would say that's the biggest weakness. I'm pretty sure there's more, but for me right now, the memory of remembering things, of material, tests, even structure of writing, that's another big weakness. So those different things and these different tools that I've learned at Curry as well as PAL have really taught me that this is what you can do to overcome this, or this is what you can do to adapt to this.
Thank you, Jack. All right, Aviva, are you ready to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So, hi everyone. My name's Aviva Hollander. I'm a rising sophomore. That's so weird. I have 2 more days of my freshman year, and then I'm finally done. Only 1 more final to take. I'm very excited to be done and just be able to take a deep breath after this very long semester. I think some of my strengths are I'm really good with making connections between information. I've always been really good at memorizing lines. I've done acting since I was a little kid, so finding connections through information that doesn't seem to have a connection, but somehow in my brain, magically it makes a connection. I think that's one of the really cool things about my ADD. My brain can jump from one piece of information to the next. And if I can make those connections through that information, it makes it a lot easier to remember that information, be able to do homework on the information, whether it's a presentation or a test. So making that connection between those informations. My biggest struggle is spelling and writing. Phonics does not make sense to me. The technique of, sound these letters out and put it together never made that connection in my brain. I've had people tell me that my entire life, and I could never tell you the word. But I found through my really good memorizations that I could memorize the words and how they looked. I don't remember the letters that are in the word, but I remember the shape of the word. And through that, I could start learning how to read, which was a really big booster in high school, being able to now learn how to read, not because I could sound out the words, but because I knew what they looked like. So I think that's been the biggest thing that I've had to learn is my brain can make these connections, even if it's not the way that everyone else says my brain should be making these connections. It's the way that my brain works, which comes back to knowing how you think. I think very sporadically, but being able to make those connections through that information makes me a much better student.
Thank you, Aviva. So this is so interesting for me, even to hear Jack and Aviva together, so I can kind of compare them. They both have strengths in language processing, and they both have weaknesses in some of the sub-processing that contributes to language, which is amazing because our theories of cognitive development often rely on this idea of cognitive bootstrapping, so that you build your thinking capacity on those underlying cognitive sub-processes. If people like Aviva and Jack have weaknesses in those cognitive sub-processes, how do they build themselves up to be advanced in their verbal thinking? Did they engage in some sort of cognitive leapfrogging where they leapt over those sort of lesser cognitive sub-processes to build something bigger? We just don't know. And that's how I think of development is, how did this happen? It's a fascinating, but the fact that this magic happens every day means that our students can teach us if we help them to articulate how they're doing this learning. They can teach us. Jack said, you know, you heard him talk, he's very articulate, but I have a weakness in thinking of the way that writing is structured. That surprises me, given how very structured his written language or his verbal language is, that the written language isn't as strong. And Aviva, this magic ability to figure out word shape without being able to do the sounds, I love that kind of dyslexia. Okay, so we're gonna move on because we wanna get right into the tech piece and sort of how they use their metacognition in technology. All right, so as practitioners, we always look for anything that's unusual because unusual is fun, right? Like as a neuropsychologist, I'm like, what's different? I don't want regular thinking. I want different thinking. Then I think about how is that connected to behavior in the classroom or work that I'm seeing a student develop or conversations that I have with a student. And then we want to support our students to understand how they learn, how it affects their learning, and be able to articulate that, and then develop their own, with us, metacognitive approaches to harness those strengths and buttress those weaknesses. Our model that I often refer to with students around self-determination originally came from Field and Hoffman in 1994. So you can see in this model that it is all about self-awareness, your ability to understand yourself. So their model of self-determination takes place in an environment. So again, we're talking about students in an environment, and it starts with knowing yourself and valuing yourself. Then based on that self-awareness and knowledge, students are making plans. They act on those plans, then they experience those outcomes and they learn from that process. And then they feed that back into how they know themselves and how they value themselves. So our students often can get into like a negative downward spiral here. Like if you do not have accurate appraisal of your strengths and weaknesses, you may not value yourself. You may have lower self-efficacy. You may make a plan that doesn't fit your strengths and weaknesses, and then you'll act on that plan and experience a negative outcome. And you might feed that back in and say, many of our students come with associated shame or beliefs about their value as humans, right? And our job as educators every step of the way is to intervene in that cycle and to say, okay, we can figure out a different way for you to know yourself. We're going to create a different plan. We're going to act on that plan, hopefully experience a different outcome. And then we're going to feed that in a positive way into knowing yourself and valuing yourself. So I'm going to ask now Jack and Aviva, if you would think about for me, and this is a reflective question, a time in your life, one of you picked the negative, one of you picked the positive, when you had a negative spiral. So Aviva, I think you could even do it with spelling, like what was spelling and reading, what was it like to feel that you couldn't do that reading? And then Jack, could you do a positive and really like talk about a time when something shifted for you, when you tried something different and you were able to do something you didn't think you could do before? So could we start with Aviva, if you're willing to share that with us?
Yeah, of course. I think when I look back at growing up, one of the biggest frustrations was not being able to order at a restaurant, which sounds like it's such a small thing, but I couldn't read the menu to figure out what I wanted. So going to new restaurants where I didn't know what type of food I wanted, I couldn't recognize the words and would try to like sound out what was on the menu so that I could order my own food became very scary because I didn't want to look, I already felt stupid, and that's the word I'm going to use because that's what I felt like when I was younger. I didn't want to look stupid in front of the waiter, which is a complete stranger. The chances of me seeing them again are very low, but me trying to like stumble over the menu and figure out what I want or be able to pronounce it was just so scary that I stopped trying for a really long time, and I would just have my mom do it, which was really, really helpful. But it just was like this really deep fear of looking stupid in front of people and like sitting there at the menu looking at it. And I know that this is English. I know that these are letters, but it could have been a foreign language to me because it just made no sense at all.
Aviva, I appreciate that. I appreciate that you used a word that you were hesitant to use, that word stupid. Children, when you're working with kids, you know, from the beginning, we are, as a species, right? We are, our brains develop to recognize patterns, and we are born social. So here we are with kids in a classroom, and Aviva is able to know right away that she's doing something different, differently, but yet she's also magical. I talk about them as like magicians and wizards, like how do they exist in that classroom? Like, how do they preserve themselves, right? Like they've got this like cloak of protection to keep their identity feeling solid. Like I can still engage in this classroom, even though I know that everybody else is doing something I can't do. So then how do I figure out this magic wizardly way to do that thing everybody else can't do? Aviva had her mom. Sometimes we have aides in the classroom. Sometimes we have technology. There are all sorts of sort of strategies that we can use, but eventually we are hoping, right, with our new IEDA to be able to implement interventions in the classroom that help students to be able to learn and sort of build from the bottom up their capacities. But we're never going to change the fundamental cognitive subprocessing. So even if we change our ability to read, we're never going to be faster processors, right? Like we can get faster on certain things, but we're never all together going to be faster processors. So there will always be constraints. So now I'm going to switch to Jack because I want Jack to think about like knowing that you had these constraints. When was a time that you intervened? You tried something that you didn't ever try before and you experienced some success.
Yeah, so talking about strategies and kind of talking about this idea of having a constraint and having success, it kind of all started in high school when I knew that I couldn't write like well. I mean, I could write, but you could barely see like what I was writing because it was just like chicken scratch. And I was okay with that because I was like, you know what, whatever. This is how I write. This is who I am. And so I just enjoyed like typing out things. It was easier for me. And so I just started this thing before really anybody else was like, I need an iPad. Like I'm going to use an iPad for school. So I started to use the iPad, I think it was senior year. And it was very helpful. Like besides math, every writing class that I had, like I took my iPad out, I typed everything out. It was just helpful for me. And then it just became a reality for me going into college where it's, okay, take your iPad out, you know, take some notes, or take your laptop out, take some notes. So to start off with having that accommodation or having that tool, that successful tool that has helped me in a positive way, it really is one of those things where I look back and I go, oh, I was kind of like the first person, not the first person to have an iPad, but the first person in my high school to be like, oh, this is helpful. Oh, this is good. And so then I went into college going, oh my God, we're going to have iPads? That's awesome. I already know an app called Notability. And so I use this app called Notability to really use it as a positive thing to take notes. And those notes became bullet notes. Those notes became essays. Those notes became papers. Those notes became research papers. And it was just a build on from, this is a tool that you can use, but here's different apps that I learned throughout Curry and PAL in the AT Center, which I work in the AT Center, so now I'm learning more about the apps and more cool things about the iPad. So I would say that's the biggest positive that has helped me learn the writing structure and also memory.
You have touched on together a few things that I want to build out on as we go through the next few slides. So first, Jack, thank you for being willing to try a totally new tool that other people weren't trying. That takes some courage, right? Good job. And we've then transitioned to using that tool at Curry and PAL in our AT Center, our Assistive Technology Center. And I'd like to introduce Megan O'Brien, our Assistive Technology Specialist. Megan, will you tell us a little bit about yourselves? Just so you know, Megan is here and she is waiting desperately for each and every one of your questions in the chat field. She can do almost anything, including answer your technical questions. So don't hold back. Here's Megan.
Hi, everybody. My name is Megan O'Brien, and I am the Assistive Technology Coordinator at Curry College. My past experience, I was an Assistive Technology Specialist, K through 12, so I would travel to different schools all throughout. I was in New Hampshire, so I would travel all throughout New Hampshire and work on different teams. So thank you for having me today, and I'm excited to answer any of the questions.
Okay, now we're going to transition into the technology itself and how we link this metacognitive approach to building self-determination and embracing our profiles to learning through technology. So you are probably all familiar with, I am hoping, Universal Design for Learning. And the three main areas of UDL are up at the top. This is from the CAST website. So the principles for UDL are to provide multiple means of engagement or ways for students to connect emotionally or affectively with material. To provide multiple means of representation, so really the posterior part of the brain, different ways for students to recognize what they're learning in the environment. What are they learning? So multiple means of representation. And then the action and expression network in the brain, and provide multiple ways for students to learn the how of learning and express what they know. When we start to think about how do we do this UDL approach with technology, we're using the SETT framework by Joy Zabala. And her framework is the student, the environment, the task, and the tools. So I went through some ways of thinking about parsing the thinking brain when I talked about cognitive subprocesses, cognition, and metacognition. Then we talked about some ways to parse behavior when we talked about the self-determination model and knowing yourself, valuing yourself, planning, acting, and experiencing outcomes. This is another way to parse the brain and neural networks in the brain by David Rose. All of this gives us information about the student. So anytime that we are approaching technology, we want to think about as many types of information about the student as we can and to bring that knowledge to student awareness. Then we're thinking about where is the student working? Like what environment is the student in? What is fixed in that environment and what is flexible? And every environment is going to be different. You all have different learning outcomes. Different teachers are teaching in different ways to different learning outcomes. So the environment is very malleable. The demands or the task demands are also malleable. So you're going to set an assignment for a student, and that task may have things that are fixed and things that are flexible as well. So really parsing all of this to think about, once I know as much as I can about the S, the E, and the T, then, only then, how do I think about what tools might be helpful for a student? So you can see that from a UDL approach, if we were thinking like, how can we provide the most amount of flexibility for the most amount of learners? Because we know all learners are variable. Just talking to Aviva and to Jack today, we've heard about their variability. You could probably each recognize something in them and then something different from them. I don't necessarily like have the ability to make the amazing connections that Aviva can do. Like my pretty linear brain, by pretty, I'm not saying beautiful though, it's probably a beautiful brain, we all have beautiful brains. My sort of simply linear brain is not capable of that attention deficit brain where all stimuli are coming in at the same time. And they're able to think about all that stimuli. My brain just doesn't do that. Like right now there's a lot going. Megan, what was in my house earlier? This is
So there was a bird in the house flying around.
So my very linear brain, right, was like, I'm practicing and prepping for our presentation. I heard some rustling. I don't own a bird. We don't have a bird. I saw my cat run by. Then I saw something flying through the air and I was like, Megan, pause everything. Like my linear brain, like pause right where we are right now, and I have to go take care of that bird. So mine's an and, like, and or, it's more or. Aviva's is an and. So we are all super duper different. And when we get to technology, we want to think about what's best for everyone and what's best for some people. So when we developed our app wheel and our approach with students, we wanted to provide like a buffet where students could come in and think about what would work for them and give the most amount of flexibility and the most amount of options to the most amount of students. So we provided a shared platform. We all use iPads. We have shared software, like a core base of software, but then we have this additional set of options that are student specific. So when we get to the SET, then we start looking at the specific tools that students might use. So Megan, do you want to walk us through the app wheel?
Sure. So how we look at the app wheel is we tell students to start in the center and then to work their way out. So we, along with students, sat down and we looked at the 4 main categories in the center. And then from there, we were able to discuss subcategories. So, okay, so we need to use a tool for reading, but what about reading? Do we need it for text to speech? Do we need it for specific ebooks? Do we need it for manipulating our PDFs that a professor may have given us? Do we need it to scan? And then from there, we're able to decide on the different applications that we use. So this changes every year. We sit down with our students and we look at this. So some years an app might be on the app wheel, some years the app might go off. It really depends what our students are using to access their curriculum. You're muted, Laura.
I want to let you know we're giving you a link to the app wheel. Megan's going to type it into the chat function, but all of this is also linked for you. So when you go in here, if you're thinking about what might your students try, it's all accessible for you. So Aviva and Jack, Jack, could you walk us through how we use, hi Svetlana. Hi, Svetlana. All right. from Ukraine. Oh my gosh. All right, we have someone from Ukraine on the line. Okay, I'm getting back. I'm getting off task. Linear brain. Jack, will you walk us through how you use the app wheel and sort of something that you discovered that you felt empowered to discover? Okay, so I want you not just to think about sort of the tool that you used, but the approach to using the tool. Like, could you reflect for us how you felt empowered to try a brand new tool?
Yeah, so looking at the app wheel, my eye really goes right to the reminders. I'm one of those people who obviously likes to be organized. However, I found an app called Pocket Schedule Planner. And I remember I was at Summer Pal. I don't know if it was last year or the year before. I think it was the year before. And everyone was like, okay, my homework. And I was like, I don't know about this, my homework. I don't like how it looks kind of old to me. It looks kind of structured weird. And so I was like, I don't know. So then I started to look for planners and reminders. And I came across this Pocket Schedule Planner. And I remember I made a video for it. And that day I had jury duty, so I couldn't present it. I actually do remember that. And so what it is it's a planner, but I found as though the colors really popped out to me. And it was one of those things where, you know, you could look at it and go, oh, this is cool. This is different, but it's only just the colors. And and I started to use it throughout class, and then I started to actually tell people about it throughout Summer Pal. And I said, hey, like, if you want like an easier planner, it's organized perfectly. Like, you can look for your classes, you can add your professors. So then I started to use that, and I was just amazed at how like organized it was, how color coordinate was. And everyone had like their own preference of a different tool. Like, if you look at this, like, you're going to look at what you think would be best for you. And I think that's awesome about the app wheel, because like it's like a buffet. You're looking for what you want. So you look at it and you go, okay, writing. So you would go into and go look at, well, what would be for writing to help you? So voice memos, talking things out would be helpful. Notability, as I talked before. Another thing that you would look at is kind of mind mapping down here, as you can see, but also like improving memory. That's perfect. So like Quizlet, I've used Lumosity, which is like a mind remembering app. I'll also use that. And there's just like different apps that you can use to really help adapt to what you need it to do. So as I talked about, yes, thank you for zooming in. As I talked about the Pocket Schedule, it's just one of those things where it's like a trial and error, and all these apps are trial and error. And I think that was kind of one of those things where I looked at that app, or it's not even just I looked at the app, I looked at the idea of a remind. And I said, I need something that to help me remind what to do. And then I just started using that, and I continued to use that.
Jack, tell us more about that trial and error process, because that's really important. And because a lot of us are with standardized testing, right? With high stakes testing, with outcomes heavy learning environments, which are designed to ensure that no children fall through the cracks, right? Like, the intention is good, but it also brings with it a performance focus. So sometimes students are not willing to try the error, right? If I encounter difficulty, I want to disengage because it feels overwhelming to me. So tell me about that trial and error and how you sort of get through the error part to learn more.
Yeah, so talking about trial and error is really important. And I think about it through Summer Pal, because I know a lot of students that I've worked with just give up. And you have to really talk to them about it, and you have to really focus on kind of why is it frustrating, asking those questions of where does that frustration come from, why are they mad about this app, what's not working. And that's our job in the AT Center to figure out kind of what is the issue, what is the problem, how can we figure it out in a way that they learn. That goes back to metacognition. And so the trial and error is, I mean, through every point of life. I mean, if you think about it, it's not even just in school. It's about that first time you got on the bike, you rode the bike into a tree, into a bush, or you fell. And you get back up on the bike and you try again, you fall. So it's one of those things where it's, you think about that particular part of life where it's, you fail, but failure is not that bad. And so I think for some people, especially myself, of, you know, learning about how I think is a way to overcome that type of situation where it's, okay, you fail, now let's figure out how do you fail. And you think about it in a way of what's happening. So being able to try and fail these apps is not really such a bad thing, because you're learning about what are things that can go wrong and learning about how to fix things, how to fix the way you're learning, how to fix the way to learn about like a certain app. So I think trial and error is, you can think about it through the bike situation, through any situation where you've just had that moment and you're, I can't do this, I'm done. And that happens a lot throughout Summer Pal and through student learning. So I think that the biggest thing to think about through trial and error is try it, see if it works. If it's not for you, then we can figure out what will work for you.
So what's really nice about the app wheel is it can act as a conversation starter. Do you agree, Jack, for some of our students, when you're working with students and they come in and they say that, you know, they need to work on writing, and, you know, we have that question, well, what about writing? So then we're able to really walk through it with the students. And I personally think it's nice, coming from a consultant point of view, it's nice not telling a student what they have to use, but giving them options of what to use. And it relates back to what Jack was saying, you know, about riding a bike, how they are trying these different tools. They find that it's not working for their specific learning profile, and then they have the ability to try something else.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the whole thing is, we're never telling you to do something. And I've learned that right from the start of PAL, is learning about your thoughts is really the big key of everything. And the idea of, we're not telling you how to do something, we're just going to show you something, and we're just going to ask you to try it. And if it just doesn't work out for you, then we're going to ask, why is that not working out for you? So we can kind of understand your learning, and also kind of understand what works for you. If something doesn't work for you, why does it not work for you? And you're always asking those, why does this not work? Or why is this the way it is? And sometimes you can figure out those answers and sometimes you can't. So that's kind of what I've learned, and also kind of what we teach as students in the AT Center.
Jack, I want to jump off of where you and Megan are right now. So you talked about experiencing frustration, offering a buffet, and not telling what to do, but, you know, teaching the student to fish, if we want to use an analogy. And part of our job is, you know, and even in our learning outcomes in our own curriculum, we want lifelong learners, right, with technology. And so we need to be able to teach students about how to learn through the technology. Aviva, how often does the technology change, and how often do we experience challenge?
Technology is constantly being developed. Like Megan said, we update the app wheel, and we've also had students who are like, well, I use this app, this is how I use it. And then we're like, that's a really great idea. We can now recommend that to someone who might think this like a similar way, or that might be helpful to a new student. So it's really awesome that we also get to learn from the students in the different ways that they use the apps, because sometimes they are they're super creative in the different way that they use apps in ways that we would never think about that. So I think it's really awesome to be able to like constantly be thinking. And also, like recently you guys were in touch with Present Pal, which is a brand new app, which is super cool. And we've been able to like talk to them about like how it can help students. And I've been really active with learning about that. And it's an awesome new app that will be able to help students have notes for presentations and be more calm during presentations. And I think those types of things are just awesome. It's constantly developing. And the more we learn about the way that us as students and the other students learn, the more we can find apps that help those.
Perfect. I think as an educator, I have to express a little bit about my personal development, and being able to not know is something that I've really had to come to terms with technology. I grew up in a time when there was not this sort of technology, and being that it changes every single day has really challenged me personally. And so I went through like a phase, I remember when I was learning technology, when I wanted to master it, right? Like this mastery approach. And I wanted to be able to do it correctly. And that only lasted so long. And now that the technology is changing so rapidly, I had to actually shift to a growth mindset. If we think about like Carol Dweck and her approaches to learning, because I have to be able to try things that I don't know how to do. And I have to be able to have Jack show me a brand new app that I've never seen before and be okay with the fact that I don't know how to use it. And I also have to be okay showing Jack that I don't know how to use it so that he feels good enough to try something that he doesn't know how to use. And sometimes it's us sitting there with students and really getting into the nitty gritty of, okay, this worked yesterday, it's not working today. Why is it not working? And like figuring out it's like some tiny setting that when the app refreshed or like you updated the app, they changed like an automatic setting, and you just have to like toggle that setting. But you have to build, I have found as an educator that I had to build a frustration tolerance that I never had before. And Jack has taught me things, Aviva has taught me things, and I have had to sort of shift my paradigm about I'm the person teaching. Now I have to share that learning with my students, and they're the ones teaching me. Okay, we have 5 minutes. I would love to dive into your questions. So Megan, I'm going to open it up. You've been monitoring the chat. Is there a question that you'd like to respond to that you saw in the chat? Could you guide us through that? And I'm going to stop my screen share so we can kind of all see each other.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So there have been no questions in the chat. We have been sharing different tools in the chat though. So you can see that we have the link to the app wheel, and then Aviva had spoke about a tool that we are looking at called Present Pal, and we added the link to that as well.
I have a question. Someone else come up with a question, but I'm going to fill space. So Jack, what does it feel like to be empowered? You did something in the last 2 weeks that you made me learn something, and I can't say that I was totally successful, but I did try. Could you tell us about what you did? And I can also like share my screen if you want to tell me, and tell me what it felt like to be empowered, because this is an amazing thing.
Yeah, if you could share your screen, that'd be great too. Yeah. So as Laura's going to share her screen, I started to create a podcast for PAL. Being a radio student, there's no radio right now for me, and there's no radio for anyone right now at school. So I started to create this idea. I had this idea pretty much in the second semester of, first I had the idea of creating a logo, and the logo's on the sweatshirts. If Laura can find that, that'd be great. But if not, that's fine. No, it's okay. No worries. No worries. No worries. We'll talk about the podcast too. But I created this idea of a logo, and I wanted to create these ideas of projects for us to do, to kind of, you know, have our own idea, but also create ideas for everyone else. So you create a logo. So what else could we do? So I said, okay, created the logo. You can do anything with that. You can put it on anywhere, any shirt, you can put it on a banner, whatever. So then I said, okay, so what's the next step? I said, I'm in radio. I want to learn about podcasts. I want to do podcasts. Mind you, I've never really experienced myself doing podcasts or doing that type of thing. So I just said, you know what? I'm in radio. We're going to try it out. And I just ended up kind of picking up this idea of, like, let's create podcasts for students, and let's create this like new world of sound for students to listen to, and you know, hear about different thoughts, hear about different opinions, maybe cheer up their day. As these podcast episodes right now have really been certain genre or a specific thing to do or to listen to, I wanted to do that right now during this time of the pandemic, because I want students to realize that we're there for them, and I want students to see a different perspective. And I think this is the best time to have a different perspective and a different way of looking at things through a podcast. I know that podcasts are starting to become big as well. So I think it's a great idea for if you're sitting at home right now, if students are on finals and they're worrying about something, they're stressing out over during this time, because I'm sure a lot of people are having that definitely stress level very high right now. So I created episodes, and I can tell you that from the first episode I did, I was like, this is awesome. This is cool. And I think that's a great way to think about things when you're thinking about new ideas, such as the PAL podcast. If you listen to the first one, it's me talking about different tips, following the tips of what to do when, if you're bored right now. Puzzles are huge. I just kind of talked about what I did and what maybe other people could do. And then my second one that we just created, and I'm very happy to do that one, is talking about stress with Laura. And I really enjoyed having her experience of talking about stress, talking about the brain and stress, and talking about how we can't eliminate stress. Because, I mean, that sentence right there plays over and over in my head because of editing. But we can't eliminate stress. We can't get rid of it because we're human. So it's interesting to see that perspective from different people. And that's what I've learned really throughout these podcasts, but also radio, is I'm taking the radio aspect of what I've done in radio, such as I've done sports, I've done music, I've talked a little bit on radio. I'm taking this idea of what I have done and what I have learned in radio and putting it into what I'm working on in work, which is a podcast. And I'm taking a different perspective. And I'm taking people's ideas and different thoughts and putting them into a podcast. Because I think it's the coolest thing to hear what Laura's thinking, what I'm thinking, and combine that. And that is making the empower of what I'm doing, but I'm also taking one idea and my idea and putting it together. And that is teamwork. And that is empowering.
Jack, so I think that's a great way to end. We are in a terrifying time. We're in an unprecedented time, at least for our generation. And being able to have a little bit of control over something, right, is going to be really meaningful for all of us. So our approach is to give students that control and to build students' ability to reflect on their strengths, reflect on their challenges, have self-awareness, have self-regulation, so that they then can make plans that are best for them. And as Jack said, like, the why is critically important. It's not just enough to know what. It's critically important to know why. Why do we do what we do? And only then can we be truly metacognitive and change our behavior. And Jack gave a great example, and Aviva too. We as humans have this amazing ability to transform our own knowledge. We don't just stop with where we are right now. We take it and we build on top of it. And we think about it passively, we think about it actively, and we use language as the tool to generate new knowledge. So in this time when we are all so separate, I hope we can find ways to be together, to use language and use technology to be together virtually and to transform our own knowledge. So we wish you the very best. I'm not sure if we have our exit poll available. I'm gonna just pause right here to see if we do. If we do not, there it is. So let us know if you would like more information and we can send it to you. And you can reach out to Gabrielle if you want to reach any of us. I want to thank Gabrielle for hosting us through EALA. Thank you, Megan O'Brien, for being chat moderator extraordinaire and assistive technology specialist. Thank you, Jack, for sharing your gifts and your challenges with the world. You've changed the way I see things. And thank you, Aviva, for being so far away, yet so close, and sharing your learning with us.